Before Azazel came, the body was a thing of function. It moved through the world as animals move, purposeful, undecorated, concerned with survival and the warmth of other bodies on cold nights. The women of the settlements around Mount Hermon wore scraped leather tied at the shoulder with sinew, rough woven flax that scratched the skin. The men wore strips of leather across the hips. Color was the color of the material itself, gray-brown leather, pale, undyed flax. The body existed in its skin without ceremony, without consciousness of itself as a surface that could speak. Then came the morning on the slope of Hermon, and everything the body meant changed forever. Adath had gone up the slope before dawn to collect a fibrous plant that grew only at that altitude. A stem that, when processed carefully, produced fiber finer than anything she could spin from flax. She was 23, and already the best weaver in her settlement, and not modest about knowing it. She was cutting stems when the light arrived, not sunrise. The direction was wrong, the quality was wrong. It came from everywhere at once, cool and clean, the way air becomes after lightning passes through it. She stood and turned, and Azazel was there. She would spend years failing to describe him adequately. Tall, not Nephilim tall, not the catastrophic height of the giants in the valleys, but tall in a way that felt like a statement. His face was arranged as a human face, but its effect was not human. Looking at him directly produced something like looking at the sun, not pain but overwhelm, the sensation of perceiving something the eye was not calibrated to contain. His hands, when they moved, left brief traces in the air behind them. He sat beside her harvested stems and began to teach. He had brought minerals ground to powder, small quantities of rendered fat, a dark fixative liquid. He showed her how the mineral powder mixed with fat produced a paste unlike anything she had worked with, stable, permanent when dry, adhesive without stickiness. But he did not show her first how to dye cloth. He showed her how to dye skin. He took a quantity of red paste and drew a line on the inside of her wrist. Precise, clean, the color of blood refined into something richer than blood itself. She looked at that line for a long time. Then she asked him to show her more. He showed her each pigment in sequence. The red from iron-rich mineral, warm and absolute. The black from burned bone-ground fine, the color that made everything beside it more visible by contrast. The white from pale processed clay, so clean it seemed to generate its own illumination. The ochre from earth itself, warm and forgiving on skin of any tone. The blue from ground lapis, rare and extraordinary, the color that cost most and said most. He showed her how red and white in specific proportion produced what he named bloom, the color of a lip at its fullest expression. The color skin produces in states of heightened feeling, now producible at will. He showed her how black, drawn as a fine line at the edge of the eye, made the eye appear deeper, wider, more present. How that same line extended past the outer corner and smudged downward, changed a face from a face into a declaration. Adath sat on the slope with pigment on her fingers, and her face half transformed and felt something entirely new. She felt looked at, not assessed or registered, looked at the way a flame is looked at, the way an unusual stone found in a riverbed is looked at. Something had shifted between her and the world's perception of her, and the shift was permanent the moment she understood it. She came down the slope in early afternoon, with the mineral pastes wrapped in leaves, and her face changed. The women she passed stopped and stared with the arrested attention of people encountering something no existing category can process. Channa, her closest companion, walked up and touched very gently the dark line at Adath's eye and asked what it was. Adath told her to come inside. By evening, Channa's eyes were lined with kohl, and her lips were bloom-colored, and she sat looking at her reflection in still water without speaking. When she finally spoke, she said she did not look like herself. Adath said she looked like more herself. Channa considered this. Then she asked to learn how to make the pigments. The knowledge moved through the women of the settlement, the way water moves through soil, following paths of least resistance, pooling where conditions were right. Within a week, there were 14 women in Adath's house. Within a season, the settlement looked in the evenings at the central fire, entirely different from what it had been. The faces were transformed, not uniformly. People found their own approaches immediately. Some lined their eyes heavily, extending the mark far past the outer corner until the gaze became faintly predatory. Some applied the bloom color with a weight that made it a mask rather than enhancement. Lips darkened to a shade that made no attempt at naturalness, that announced itself as pure intention. Some used the white pigment above the kohl line, creating eyes that appeared to hold their own illumination. Some used ochre alone, lightly, producing a warmth that could be mistaken for health or desire or both. The men watched. The watching was not simple. The women had always been present, known, recognized, valued as necessary. Now they were present differently. A woman who has painted her face with intention announces something. She says her body is a surface she has considered. She says she has made choices about how that surface meets the world. She says without language that she is aware of being seen and has decided to participate in that seeing, rather than merely submit to it. In a world where women had moved through daily life as practical presences, undecorated and undeliberate, the shift was seismic. The clothing followed the faces. Azazel returned 3 more times that season, teaching fiber processing, the mordants that fixed dye permanently into cloth, the threading sequences that produced pattern within the weave itself. But beneath the techniques he taught something harder to name, a way of thinking about the body and the material covering it, not as protection, as collaboration. The body had a shape, the cloth had properties, drape, weight, the way it fell from a shoulder or gathered at a waist. The craft was in understanding how cloth could work with the body's shape to produce a third thing, neither cloth alone nor body alone. A composition, a visual argument about what the body was. Adath understood this completely and applied it without restraint. The garment she produced was nothing the settlement had seen before. It began at the left shoulder, one shoulder only, leaving the right deliberately bare, and fell in a single dramatic drape across the body. The fiber was the fine-stemmed plant from Hermon, processed to a smoothness the settlement had never achieved, dyed with iron mineral red, to a depth that seemed to pull light inward rather than reflect it. At the waist, she gathered it with a twisted black cord wound twice before knotting, and the gathering created 2 different relationships between cloth and body. Above, a loose drape that moved away from and back toward the skin with each breath, suggesting rather than defining. Below, cloth that followed the hip with a deliberate attention that was neither accidental nor innocent. The hem fell to mid-calf. Not the ankle, which hides the movement of walking, not the knee, which is too abrupt, but the mid-calf that allows the full expression of motion, the shift of weight, the articulation of the body in movement. She wore it to the evening fire and the settlement went silent. Imitation was immediate. The garment worked because of Adath's specific choices, and copies that altered those choices produced different results, some less successful, some accidentally more so, because people making choices about their own bodies discovered things about themselves they had not previously known. A woman who had considered herself unremarkably shaped discovered that a specific gathering technique created an effect she had no previous word for. A woman told since childhood she was too tall discovered that height combined with the right drape and right color was an advantage to be used rather than a problem to manage. Then came Rama. Rama had no skill at the loom, but extraordinary instincts for what color did on skin. She carried the pigment knowledge past the face entirely, understood the body in motion as different from the body at rest, made designs that changed as the body moved. She understood that the border between garment and bare skin was itself a compositional choice, and that what was painted on skin just above a hemline changed the meaning of both simultaneously. She painted herself first. Then others came. Paint me something that makes my shoulder worth looking at. Paint me something for my wedding night. Paint me something for the evening when the Nephilim chieftain attends the fire, and I want him to see me without fear. That last request came from Channa, and Rama spent 2 days on it. She dressed Channa in deep saffron, yellow gold from a mineral Adath had spent months tracking down, and against Channa's brown skin, the color integrated rather than sitting on the surface, as if derived from her skin rather than applied over it. The garment covered one shoulder and fell open at the side from mid-thigh downward, held at 3 points by small hammered metal clasps. the gaps between them showing skin the way a lattice shows what lies behind, partially in a way that suggests more than it reveals. On the exposed areas, Rama painted the textile geometries in pigment, continuing the cloth's patterns onto skin so that the border between garment and body dissolved into a single unbroken composition. The kohl at Channa's eyes extended to meet a line of gold mineral paste running toward the cheekbone. Her lips were the deepest bloom, darkened with iron red into a shade that made no attempt at appearing natural. It was the color of pure intention, undisguised. Channa walked to the fire and looked across it at Yavael, the Nephilim chieftain, and was not afraid of being seen. Yavael studied her for a long time. Then he said, in the register slightly below what the human ear comfortably processes, that she was the most remarkable thing he had encountered in the centuries of his existence. Channa said that she knew what followed was not safe and did not end simply. But in its early period, while Channa moved between the settlement and Yavael's territory with the confidence of someone who had negotiated her position through exactly these skills, it changed what the settlement understood about power. Power did not require the 40-cubit body. It did not require the shadow that fell across entire villages. It could be held in an ordinary human frame, carried in the deliberateness of a lined eye and a painted shoulder and a garment that understood itself as argument. Power could be worn. This was Azazel's deepest teaching, not the mordants or threading sequences or specific minerals. The teaching beneath the teaching was this: the adorned body demands to be read, and a body that demands to be read holds power outside every ordinary hierarchy. The years that followed brought extraordinary elaboration. Crimson marked those with access to labor. Violet, requiring both the costliest red and the costliest blue, marked those with direct watcher knowledge. Rama's skin painting became a craft of specialists. Beauty in its new complexity became expensive, and expensive beauty became a hierarchy as legible as any other. But underneath the hierarchy ran the original thing, what Adath had felt on the slope with red on her wrist, what Channa had felt at the basin. The body discovering itself as a surface worth considering. In the third year, the sky changed quality. A density arrived in the air, luminous, weighted, as if the atmosphere had become more attentive. The animals stood in groups without apparent cause. The wind shifted at hours when wind should not shift. Adath felt it most clearly in the evenings, sitting alone after the fire died, surrounded by her dyed fibers and stacked garments and lined containers of pigment paste. She looked at them and permitted herself for the first time the question she had been refusing. The knowledge was real. The beauty it had generated was real. The power Channa had carried to the fire in saffron and painted gold, that had been real and had been hers. But it had come from a broken source, and she was old enough now to feel the fracture running through it, to sense in her finest crimson something that was not only color, to feel in her most accomplished cloth something that was not only craft. The gift was inseparable from the giver. The beauty was inseparable from the transgression that had made it possible. She sat with this and could not resolve it, because it could not be resolved. Outside, the animals faced north and did not lie down again. The sky held its enormous attention over the world below, and the world moved through the firelit evening in its dyed and painted and adorned magnificence, saffrons and crimsons catching and releasing light, coal-lined eyes reading across the darkness with a presence unlined eyes never have, painted skin carrying its geometries through the air with a consciousness that was entirely new in the world and entirely, stubbornly, irreversibly human. The rain was 2 seasons away. The bodies moved through the firelit dark, beautiful and unaware, wearing on their skin every lesson the fallen sky had given them, wearing it completely, wearing it in the full radiance of a world that had learned too much too soon and made of that excess something extraordinary and doomed and entirely its own.